We're live.
All right. Good evening, everybody. You're here at the Reptile Hangouts podcast. Your wonderful co-host, Charles, is me as always. We got Nick over here with Galaxy Gecko and Gabriel
Gecko
with DIY.
Galaxy.
Gecko Galaxy, man.
I know. I was hoping that nobody would say anything, but yeah, anyway. Interesting. Fun. There's always a way to mess this intro up. There's always a way to mess the intro up. Anyway, so there's that. Yeah, USARK.
Okay, so as always, I'm going to do my weekly plug for USARK. If you're not familiar with USARK, they're the only organization here in the U.S. that's fighting for our rights to be able to keep reptiles. There's a lot of legislation being put into place that could definitely harm that in the long run. So if you're not a member of USARK, please do consider becoming a member. Go to usark.org, check out their different levels of membership. And what I'm saying is apparently really funny because you are smiling.
I did. I can't believe I messed that up.
Oh, that's what it is. Anyway, usark.org. Go and check out their different levels of membership. You can pay $5 a month, as much as a cup of coffee probably costs you every single day. And you'll be making a big difference. So definitely do that. And I think Charles, who's standing up, has a shout out as well.
I do, guys. Sorry, it's the first time figuring out how to operate the equipment that's in my room that I've been doing this podcast
week 5
5
guys.
weeks in a row. But yeah, week 5.
We're gonna get it.
It's worse than week 1. Really, yeah. Anyway, so here we are. I'm sure you've noticed my setup is a little different back here. This is a new addition to the family. Just recently rescued this veiled chameleon female who appears to be mostly full grown. Don't know her age exactly. Estimated to be around the 1.5 year range. But I am new to chameleons. And in my research, I realized that there is this wonderful plethora of information that is exclusively provided by Bill Strand at Chameleon Academy. And if you have or are thinking about getting a chameleon, this is just hands down the greatest resource. I think it's so great what he does. He's got podcasts, he's got YouTube, and if you go to thechameleonacademy.com, he has modules set up almost like a college curriculum kind of. It is amazing, step by step per species, everything you could possibly need to know. And if you listen to his podcast and you watch his content, you'll realize that he is always doing research, and he's consistently updating what he knows and what kind of care tactics you should use when it comes to chameleon husbandry. And he's just a stand-up guy that he's providing this world-class, one-of-a-kind information based on hard science and facts for free. He has some other things going on. He makes these custom cages he's designed a long time ago, the Dragon Strand, beautiful chameleon cages. And just make sure you check out chameleonacademy.com. Or the YouTube, or on Facebook, or on Apple Podcasts. Got a great podcast, great content. I know you'll enjoy it as much as I have. So that's our little shout out to Mr. Bill Strand over at the Chameleon Academy.
Yep, and the link is in the description.
We would love to have you on here one day, man. We're a huge fan of everything you stand for. So that's good job. Kudos to you, man.
Yeah, heck yeah.
Oh yeah, link is in the description for
Chameleon
Academy. Yep.
All right. So as you may have seen, based on the thumbnail, tonight we're just sort of going to go a little bit freelance and do some talking about some commonly kept reptile species. We're basically just going to talk about their care from our standpoint with our own experience, and then to sort of talk about a little bit of the information that's widely available to you to find out about how to keep some of these common species, and sort of how the care has a little bit evolved over time, at least since we've had our own experiences with it as well. So I guess I will start off by talking about what I consider to be the very best starter snake. If you've never had a snake before and you want to get a new snake, and this is just my opinion, it's also the opinion of some other people, but but it's mine. I would seriously consider getting a corn snake. If you've never heard of a corn snake, you're not familiar with them. They're a North American rat snake species. Scientific name is Pantherophis guttatus, and they are widely distributed across the southeastern United States, all the way from the Florida Keys, and with some isolated populations in New Jersey even. That's the northernmost part of their range. Um, they have a wide range of phenotypes. Also, if you're not familiar with that word, it basically just means what color they are, sort of how they look on the outside, um, across those ranges as well. So within the hobby of keeping corn snakes, you have people who are focused on, if you're familiar with like ball pythons, especially morphs. So these are phenotypes that we've selectively bred for that are like crazy colors. And all that exists within corn snakes, just like it does ball pythons. But there's also some really cool locale patterns as well. So you have things like a Miami phase, which comes from Miami-Dade County, believe it or not. And you have also things that are very popular, like the Abbott's Okatee, which is a color phase that comes from Jasper County, South Carolina.
I love the Okatee corns.
Oh yeah. If I ever get
Probably
back into
one of my
corns,
favorites.
I'm definitely gonna go with locales almost exclusively, and Abbott's will definitely be one of the ones I go for. But yeah, so they're not only a wide range of phenotypes, but they're also highly adaptable, based on the fact that they have such an extensive range, so they can take a wide range of climates. And that's one of the reasons I think they're one of the best starter snakes is they're so forgiving. They can take a wide range of temperature variations. So if you make a mistake or if something happens and it gets cold or something on a particular night, or even if your power goes out or something like that, unless it's like 10 degrees, you're not going to have problems with this snake. It's not going to get sick. It's not going to stop eating for months on end because the temperature
they're really
dropped.
hardy.
They really are.
I mean, we have them here in Virginia abundantly, and they thrive.
Yeah, where I am in West Virginia, they're less common, but they are native. We have them in like the section that's out near Maryland. There's like a small pocket of them out there. But yeah, they are extremely hardy, extremely adaptable. It's one of the things, it's the main reason I think that they're such a good starter snake. That and the fact that, when you're trying to get them feeding, babies can definitely be a little bit challenging to start at first, just like any species. But once they're established, which is usually when you, the pet owner, is going to get it, they're not going to refuse food from you almost ever, unless they're just in a really bad shed and just not in a good mood. And even then, that's like isolated. So really good choice for a starter snake. For me, they go back a long ways. They were one of my first pet snakes. Incidentally, if you listen to the first episode, I got a gray banded king snake sort of out of nowhere as one of my first snakes. But I did keep a corn snake as a pet. One of my first ones, I got it as a baby. And the way I used to keep them when I first started, which was when I was exclusively a pet keeper, is I did them in tanks. And I had mine in a 29-gallon aquarium. Most of the time you get recommended like a 20-gallon. 29 is nice because it's taller than 20 long, so it gives you more vertical space. And these guys do climb, I find, especially when they're babies, because I have a little bit of experience with seeing some young corn snakes in the wild, neonates, and all the ones that I've seen in southern Florida that were neonates were 20, 30 feet up a tree. So they love to climb. And so I gave that corn snake a whole bunch of different branches, a lot of foliage, things like that, a little hide rock, water. It's pretty basic.
That brings me to a question though. What you said this was like one of your first snakes, and you think personally, and maybe widely thought that it is the best starter snake. What does your startup setup look like on one of these guys? What do you recommend? I got my corn snake. Here's what I need to take it home and enjoy it as a pet. Walk us through that.
So if you're going to the pet store, or even if you're going to a reptile expo, which I highly recommend you do that as opposed to a pet store most of the time, support local breeders, is you minimum, if you're getting a neonate corn snake, something that's a baby, probably like 8 to 12 inches long, you're going to want to start them in a 10-gallon at very least. They obviously can live in smaller enclosures, but 10 gallons going to last a while because they're not going to grow super fast. And there's a variety of substrates that you can use. You can use aspen chips, which is what I pretty much used to use fairly exclusively, at least when I was in the breeding phase of it. You can also use like cocoa fiber. You can use Reptibark if you're familiar with that. That's a product I think put out by Zoomed. Or if you wanted to go, all out, the big buzzword now is bioactive. So if you wanted to set the tank up bioactive, you could do it that way. And typically use like an ABG or Atlanta Botanical Gardens mixture, which has cocoa fiber, peat moss, orchid bark, things like that, and sphagnum moss. So it drains water very well and doesn't retain a lot of moisture and get real caked up. Obviously, you need a water dish. You need to make sure that the water is clean all the time. So you want to be changing that water at least every other day to every day. And something that is big enough for the snake to get in, because snakes sometimes just like to get in their water dish and soak. So typically you want to give them something that's big enough. And obviously you want to give them a hide. And this is one of the subjects that we're going to touch on a lot tonight that's sort of changed over the years. Typically, when we first started, it was like, give them a hide. But now, and we've mentioned this in another episode, we want to try to create as many microclimates for them as possible so that they can choose where they want to be. So we're not only giving them a place where they can be hot and a place where they can be cold, but you can do multiple hides, and you should do multiple hides where they can have a place that they can hide, but it's cool, place that they can hide, but it's warm, place that they can hide, but it's humid too, because humidity becomes extra important when they're shedding. So when they're shedding, you'll be able to tell their skin gets opaque and kind of blue in color, and they will typically seek out humidity during that time because it helps them get that skin off. And if they're shedding healthily, they're typically shedding in about one piece. Real quick, shout out from my man, Jacob Fowkes. He's my show buddy here. Wrapped Up Reptiles. If you're watching the show, check out Wrapped Up Reptiles on Facebook. He's another great breeder in my local area. Thanks, Jacob, for coming out and supporting the show tonight. Appreciate it, buddy. And yeah, so give them a cool hide, give them a moist hide, give them a warm hide, but also give them places to climb. This is what we talk about when we talk about enrichment. We talk about, not just giving them a flat bottom to choose from. So give them some branches in there, give them some foliage that's nice and thick. So if they are climbing, they can still feel like they're secure and they're not being watched by, potential predators. This is all stuff that's genetically ingrained in the snake. They think from an early age that they have to watch out for predators. So making them feel secure is really important. So
you talked about moist versus like dry hides and stuff like that. What kind of humidity do we need to keep this guy at?
So overall ambient humidity, it's generally recommended anywhere between 40 and 60%, like on a daily basis. But you want to have that daily spike usually all the time. So the best thing to do
is that a spike during the day, or is that a spike at evening and letting it dry through the day?
I would say it's probably best to do a spike like in the early morning. So when you get up in the morning, mist that
like
tank
an early
down,
morning, like a dew kind of in the morning. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and then it'll dry up over the course of the next few hours after that light's been on. And if you're home and you want to give them a random mist in the middle of the day every now and then, just to kind of mix it up, because you never know, it's going to rain sometimes in the wild, things like that, then you can always do that. You don't want to soak the tank all the time. They don't need to have a really high humidity level all the time.
See, my favorite thing to do is actually, I like to spray all my stuff at night. That way the humidity can stay in there. And then in the morning when all the lights, come on and everything, it actually, it'll dry everything out. But it's actually pretty cool. Like when you wake up in the morning, all the glasses and everything will still be covered in, in moisture. And then throughout the day, like in nature, it'll actually dry out as the heat lamps, heat everything up.
That's a big thing in chameleon husbandry, because obviously I am absolutely no chameleon expert. But as I mentioned earlier, from our friend Bill Strand over there at the Chameleon Academy, I've been watching a lot of his stuff so I can make sure that I keep this little girl right here the best that I can. And he says that a lot, what Gabe just said. You want to mist at night, maybe a little through the night, to really kind of replicate those fogs rolling in at night and, like the dew that accumulates overnight, and maybe even a little rain shower. And they'll wake up to the dew on the leaves and they can drink and they'll stay hydrated by breathing in that moist air. And then, you got your dry cycle through the day. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
something
I'm
I
glad
like
you
to
said
do.
that, because that's
Yeah, something I like to do. I actually will spray down with warm water. You know, like actual like pretty decently hot. Because when you put it on your mister and it's a really fine mist, it cools down really fast. So by spraying with something that's warmer, it'll actually it'll keep it from like plummeting the temperature in your tank, you know,
yeah.
really fast.
That's
Uh,
a good
that's
point too. Yeah.
yeah, that's a
Yep.
cool thing that I don't know I learned
No,
actually.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that's an excellent point. So yeah, I don't know that it necessarily matters if you're spraying at night or in the morning. This is just sort of from my experience, what I would do with this particular species. But yeah, spraying at night is also 100% an option. You basically just want to make sure that at some point during most days they have a spike in humidity, because this is a sort of a natural cycle that they're going to see in the wild, and it's going to be greater or smaller depending on what part of the range a wild snake comes from. But you're not getting a wild snake, you're getting something that's generations into captive breeding. So however you set it up as far as your misting schedule is probably going to work. They're really forgiving in that matter too. I mean, as long as you give them some access to humidity, you're not going to have a problem.
Yeah, and you're right, and
But
that's why they're arguably probably the best starter snake out there.
absolutely.
That and other small polluters too.
Yeah. And going on to the next part, going on to the heating element, reptiles, of course, almost every reptile in the world, I think minus maybe a couple of obscure species that no one's allowed to keep, are ectothermic. So that means that they regulate their body temperature based on the environment. So you hear the term cold-blooded, that's basically what that means. So they need to have some sort of heat in order to warm up their body, be active, metabolize their food, all that stuff. So you're going to use either an overhead heat lamp if you're using like a tank, or you can use a under tank heater like a mat. If you use a mat,
What
you should
about
definitely.
Well,
Go ahead.
yeah, what about like a hybrid of both? Because I know right now,
No,
with
yeah, you
my
can do
little
both.
ball, yeah, I run a heating pad for his hide, which is like pretty much where he primarily is at all points of the day because he's nocturnal. But and then I have a spot lamp or a heat lamp or a basking lamp, whatever you want to call it, just in case he wants to really get cooking, so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, is that a viable option to run
Sure.
that kind of hybrid heating, and then
Yeah,
obviously rely on ambient temperature of the room as well?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's definitely a viable option depending on the size of the tank that you're using. I would say that if you're using a 10-gallon tank for a really small tank or a really small corn snake that you just got, you would probably do one or the other.
Yeah.
The advantage to a heat pad is that if you stick it on a thermostat, which you should, you basically put that probe from that thermostat right on your heat mat or right on top of your substrate, wherever you want to know the temperature. And it will periodically switch it on and off to keep that regulated. That's important. You should definitely do that. Then, yeah, it runs all the time. It's always going to be providing some heat. But night temperature drops are important. So if you're running a 10-gallon tank, I think the best way, this is just my personal opinion, is to do an overhead heat lamp in appropriate wattage. For a 10-gallon tank, that's probably going to be like a 50-watt spot bulb, maybe, not much bigger than that. Because you're looking for a basking area, someplace where they can go and ultimately get the most warmth that they're looking for in the upper 80s to like max 90. And then some of that's going to flood over and sort of warm the rest of the tank, but it's going to be a lot closer to ambient temperatures on the other side of the tank from where you have that bulb on top.
Yeah, the whole thing is about having a big gradient.
Yeah, a gradient. And I mean, you can't really achieve a true gradient in something as small as a 10-gallon tank. But if you're looking for something that's small enough to get you started, then a 10-gallon definitely works for a baby. I will say this, corn snakes are notorious escape artists. So if you do a tank with a regular screen top, you need to make sure that that thing is really secure, get some really good clips for it, maybe even stick some extra weight on it. Because if there's even a small gap, they will find a way out. When they're babies, they're no bigger around than a number 2 pencil most of the time, sometimes even smaller. So
I've seen
what about
glasses.
what about diet? What are we starting these guys with? Pinkies, probably?
If you're buying a corn snake from a reptile show or even a pet store, ideally they're already started on typically frozen thawed pinkies. Excuse me. So basically little baby pinky mice that these big mice breeders mass produce, and then they, humanely euthanize them and freeze them. So you can buy them, individually, or you can buy them in large packs, thaw one at a time. Basically what you want to do is, I typically will keep it in a small plastic bag where it's almost sort of vacuum packed with the plastic against it, put it in a warm, little container of water to let it slowly thaw out and raise up to temperature. And then, depending on how hungry your snake is, you can offer it to them with tongs. They might take it off of it, or you might just have to leave it for it. Or what a lot of people do to sort of discourage what we call cage aggression, which isn't really aggression, it's just a feeding response that they sort of learn over time. You can even take them out and feed them in a smaller container. So, snakes will learn that that's what's going to happen over time after, several months to a year of feeding them that way. They will already know that if you're plucking them out and putting them in this little shoebox or something on the side, that they're going to get fed. So you look like you might have had a question, Bub.
No, yes, kind of. Anyway, now being that, pinkies are obviously, they're just that, they're relatively fresh to this world. I don't really want to use the term babies because that seems kind of that seems kind of weird. But
everything
anyway,
in nature eats babies, bro. That's just what it is.
Yeah. Anyhow, though, I mean, being that, I mean, they're virtually harmless. They don't really even have
They don't pose a threat.
develop sight, teeth, anything like that. I mean, could you argue that there's more nutrition to be had from a live pinky than a frozen one?
I think
Being
that there's,
if you have access now, because not all places do, it's usually going to be like local, not chain type pet stores that'll have your live feeders. And I mean, that's in my area. I don't know if that's everywhere else or not.
In
but
general,
I can't say with 100% confidence, that with my knowledge base, that I can say that there's a huge difference in nutritional value between a live pinky and a frozen thawed pinky, other than the fact that there's definitely going to be some cellular damage and breakdown from the freezing and thawing process. That's 100% for sure.
And my thought process on that would be that, I mean, that thing is nursing literally until the minute you pluck it from the pet store.
Yeah, but I don't know. To me, that's just like kind of like, unless you have to, is just slightly frowned upon.
Yeah, that's a good point. So Jacob commented, he says, in his opinion, it's more enrichment to feed live, but not sure about nutrition. Yeah, I feel the same way, Jacob. I think that there's that for the animal to be able to actually hunt its food in a similar way that they would in the wild is 100% enrichment, and it's definitely good for the well-being of the animal. That being said, my next point was going to be that down the road, if you find yourself in a situation, where you're not necessarily able to get live food or something like that, sometimes snakes can develop a certain pickiness. If they're used to something live, they may not take a frozen thawed later once you start to move up into larger sizes. And if you find yourself unable to get those live ones, I'm not sure where that would happen. I don't know how hard it is here because I don't currently keep snakes at this point in my life, but it might be an issue that you run into. So those are all things to consider when it comes to feeding. The other thing to consider when it comes to feeding is the schedule. Now, if you're bringing home a small little baby corn snake, you're going to want to feed it once a week. They're actively growing. They're very active in moving around, and they're using a lot of energy to do that. So feed them once a week. And anything you find online, pretty much, I did some looking in the recent days just because I haven't really looked into corn snakes. I used to keep them on a pretty big level, and I don't feel like I know most of what I need to know, at least if I wanted to just go pick one up. But I looked, and the consensus is usually to sort of continue that every 7 to 10 day feeding schedule on into adolescence and adulthood. But I think, and I've heard from a lot of keepers, that in general with snakes, not just corn snakes, that it's better to feed more sparsely as they get older. So you can even stretch that out to once every couple of weeks.
It is, man. Overfeeding is a thing, man, that people don't really realize. So
and overfeeding is not only dangerous for obvious reasons where any animal can get obese if you overfeed it, but it's also potentially, and I looked for some really solid research on this, I couldn't find it, but I hear people in the industry talk about it all the time, and I don't know if it's just observation.
Like developmental issues.
Right, like they've been keeping snakes for such a long time, and it's just something that they've observed. But I think that once they get into a certain range, that adolescence and adulthood, feeding more sparsely can just help extend their lifespan overall over time. Because I mean, you got to think about what these things are designed to do in the wild. They're opportunistic feeders. Most of the time, they are not going to find food every single week. They're going to look, but they're not going to find it every week. So feeding more sparsely once you get out of that baby stage and they're really well established and their body weight is good is probably beneficial.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah. Thank you for that. Sorry, very in-depth, solid explanation of corn snake husbandry.
Yeah,
that was.
I mean, and there's and it's worth mentioning. Go ahead.
Go ahead, bro. You're good. No, I was saying there's more stuff. I'm sure.
Oh yeah, I mean it's worth mentioning.
Yeah, no, there's probably 3 or 4 podcasts worth of stuff.
Just corn snake stuff. Yeah.
Exactly.
We talked about this earlier that it could, me and you, Gabe, that it could be, we could do a podcast on a single species. We definitely could. So I think it's worth mentioning though that I kept on. Yeah, for sure. It's something to consider. That I kept on sort of both sides of the coin. I started out as more of a pet keeper, and then several years later I got into the breeding side of it. And I kept corn snakes in a rack system, just like, many ball python breeders do, many other kinds of snake breeders do. And they did well, at least in my opinion. They ate all the time. They shed well. They were, by all intents and purposes, or for all intents and purposes, looking healthy visually, and they acted normal. That said, I think if you're the average pet keeper and you really want to do your snake a favor and you really want to do yourself a favor, setting up a good size enclosure for them that has a lot of enrichment opportunities and a lot of microclimates, or at least as many as you can achieve, is beneficial in the long run. So that's what we would recommend for the pet keeper. That said, though, people who breed tons and tons of these so that you can have them as pets, and so that they're available at pet stores and that they're available at expos, rat keeping works well too. And there are ways to improve rat keeping too. You can change the substrate. You can add enrichment into those tubs. There's even some companies working on lighting for those tubs so that they can have a day-night cycle, which is really nice.
And you could also put out there that you can breed in nicer setups, just because you're looking to breed 1 pair or 2 pairs of corn snakes or rat snakes, ball pythons, whatever it is, doesn't mean that you have to put them in a rack.
For sure.
Have nice setups, that, serve multiple purposes.
Hey, Gabe, let me stop you for a second.
It's healthier.
Are those crickets as loud as I think they are?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I can hear them. Yeah.
Those, geckos, bro. That's something you get used to.
No, but I'm talking about for the podcast specifically.
It's okay. It's not a bother.
I can't do nothing about it, bro.
Unless you just want to take them out of the room.
My crickets, not yours.
No, it's Gabe. It's
serious.
That's my crickets, bro.
Bro, no, it's not. It's my crickets, 100%. It's my crickets. They're sitting like right here.
Crickets. We're good, man.
I think because I can't hear yours.
Keepers, man.
The consensus, the consensus is I think it's good. I've listened to many a reptile podcast by many a podcaster, and there's always some kind of something going on, whether it be a bug, whether it be a frog going in the background.
It's actually kind of peaceful.
Jacob says he thought it was here at his house. He didn't even know the difference. So
see, there you go.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, but let's make our segue into Gabe's topic of the night is going to be Burmese pythons. Gabe, Mr. Python man. So we're going to talk about something that I cannot. All right. Anyway, continue, buddy. Burmese pythons. It's all you.
He probably can't read my handwriting. But actually, no, not even handwriting.
It's all typed.
It's all typed, yeah. So, but anyways, man, I'm probably not going to go in depth as you, because I don't know. I'm just not as good of a talker. But
no, you can do it. You can do it. You have to have confidence. Just talk like you're talking to us, like you're trying to explain to me.
But Burmese pythons, that's was my second snake ever. Man, that's freaking horrible to even say. But Burmese pythons is a snake that comes from Southeast Asia. They're a very, very large constrictor python. And they come from basically like man, I gotta look at my notes, bro. But they're from Southeast Asia. It's a big snake. They can get up to 15 plus feet, and not a lot of people
hogs
should probably have them. Yeah, they're hogs. Man. They get huge. But anyways,
yeah, and they're native to. There it is. There it is.
30 minutes.
They're native to Florida, right? That's their native
now they are
now, right?
Now they are.
No.
Everything thrives in Florida.
Well, yeah, Burmese. It's a big snake, man. I got my first one back in my high school days, and I kept it in. Hold on, I'm trying to talk and turn my lights on. There you go. There we go, guys. Sorry about that. And then my daughter's crying now. But
that
I got
happens.
this one back in my high school days, and it was a huge learning curve. Just because it's a big snake, man. You don't realize how fast they grow. Okay, so my first one was kept in a 55-gallon tank with just a regular, like a radiant heat tape on the bottom with a thermostat. And at that point, I was actually under the impression that all you really needed for a snake was basically just a hide, a little bit of heat, and a water bowl. Okay, because that's all you saw basically on social media. That's what people did.
Yeah.
So I had this snake, man, for, I don't know. Well, I had her in this classroom. She outgrew the 55. And then that was just in 1 year, basically, one regular school year. And I ended up having to get a bigger setup because I wasn't prepared. And basically, I got a 180-gallon tank that I found secondhand cracked, and it was cracked. And that's the first setup that I actually did my first DIY stuff on. But anyway, obviously you can see that my level of care at that point wasn't that great, because
it was minimalistic.
Yeah, it really was. It was minimalistic. And now as I've gotten older and I've done more research and stuff like that, I've realized that it's basically all wrong, man. You can't put a 15-foot snake in a, as back then, they say put an adult Burmese python, reticulated python, any type of big constrictor, you could put them in a 6 to 8 foot enclosure as an adult. And now, we know that you really should probably keep, well, most snakes, you should at least keep them in an enclosure that's, I want to say, 2/3 their length. Yeah.
As long
minimum.
As them, or 1.5 maybe their length.
Well,
they need to be able to stretch out.
They say minimum, 2/3. But if you were to do it, you should really allow your snake to be able to stretch out 100%. So you would want to go with something that's more, let's say, at least one time their length to 1.5 times. That would be great. It'd be better.
Yeah.
But the issue is that it's a 15-foot snake. In general, right. They can get to be 15 feet. That's more of like an average size. I'd say maybe for a male, you're looking at 11, 12 feet. And, a female, unless she's been pounded and overfed, should really be, on the like 15, 16 feet max, man. They get, and that's still a really big snake.
Yeah.
But anyways, you got to think that a snake that big really shouldn't be in a 6 to 8 foot enclosure. You're going to need something that's like I said, at least, like one time the size of them. So you're going to think that you probably need an enclosure that's, I don't know, like
Yeah. So I mean, what it
technical 10, 15 feet, man.
So what it sounds like you're getting at, like, let's say you go to the magical land of Burmese pythons, and you get your first Burmese python, wherever that is. Hopefully, a reptile expo. Don't really know too many pet stores
I'll be
selling
honest.
Burms, but so I mean, it sounds like the best plan, or the best preparation here is to go larger, almost out the gate, with a larger enclosure. Yeah. So I mean, you're not putting a baby berm in a fucking 10, a 20, and a 40, and a 55. You know what I mean? You're changing
they grow so
terrariums
fast.
every 2 months. Exactly. So
really, I mean, like, I mean, you don't want to start a hatchling in a 6-foot enclosure or nothing, but you can start. I would start with nothing smaller as a baby than like a 40 breeder. But you got to understand that within the first year max, I mean, within the first year, maybe 8 months, you're going to have something that's, at least 6 feet.
Now, you said something that made me think. This is a serious question. I don't really know the answer to it. I mean, is there necessarily something wrong with starting, a juvenile animal in a large enclosure?
Well, no.
I mean, because if you think about when they're born in the wild, they got the whole wide world, baby.
You could keep you could keep them in something slightly bigger for sure. I mean, you could put them, in like a 4x2. Actually, a 4x2 would probably work great for a hatchling. But what I'm trying to say is that it's going to outgrow that very, very fast, faster than you think.
Yeah, and I've heard this. I don't know.
We have a question from one of our loyal viewers.
What's it say? Is 6 to 8?
My beautiful wife.
Yeah. Is 6 to 8 feet the length of the front, or like diagonal length? Maybe she means front to back.
The enclosure, yeah. So
yeah, that would be the width.
6 feet long.
Yeah.
And I mean,
by X amount deep.
You want to go probably, you want to go 6 foot by 3 foot. I think they make enclosures like that, or like 8 foot by 4 foot.
Now, Gabe, talk about what goes into doing it DIY, since you're the DIY reptile keeper.
Yeah, man.
Because that's really kind of the way when it comes to these big snakes, right?
In general, most people don't have the space. I mean, we're just talking about space, okay? Not the financial or whatever you need to have a snake this big. But in general, I mean, you're going to need, within the first 2 years, you're going to need probably a 8x4 enclosure if you wanted to give it the ability to do stuff. Because if you look into the natural history of a Burmese python, during certain types of the year, they come from like grasslands and like flooded grasslands and swamps and stuff like that. In like Middle Asia, China, just basically all Southeast Asia. But during big times of the year, they're actually, I mean, they could be considered semi-aquatic. I mean, they spend a lot of time in the water. They're described as, being watched traveling the water looking for prey, kind of like almost
like anacondas,
Yeah.
So you would think that you would want to give a snake that spends a big amount of the time in the wild, you'd want to give it something that he could soak in and be able to have space to stretch out. So minimum, I mean, and I would say that's for like a 10 to 12 foot snake, you would probably need like an 8x4 with some sort of, like big tub or something like that for it to be able to soak in. And then you're also going to want to understand that these snakes don't, even though they're technically considered heavy bodied, I mean, most people, I mean, they're bigger snakes. A healthy one is not, is going to climb, one that's not super obese, they're going to climb, man. I'll tell you what, there's been plenty of times that I've put one to soak in a bathtub, and I've come in there and they've been wrapped around a shower curtain rod. Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
just sitting there like a emerald tree boa or a green tree python. It's crazy, man.
All right, Gabe. So you got this.
Pose the same question.
You got this this 12 or even a 15-foot Burmese python. It was laid on your doorstep like an orphan. Now it's yours. You have to build an enclosure. Nobody's gonna go buy an enclosure for this thing. Where do you go? You go to Lowe's.
I go to Lowe's.
You start looking at lumber, plexiglass.
Basically,
what goes into building an enclosure for something of that size?
Yeah, I guess I did start ranting about something else. So.
No, it's good. It's good.
I can't help but think about the enclosure you have, directly to your that's whatever that is,
that's
right?
For my Tegu's enclosure. But basically, what you got to do is figure out what space you got. Okay, and I mean,
so your dimensions that you want to go with as far as usable space is available.
And I hate to say minimum, but you got to look at the requirements for your animal, and hopefully you kind of already done that. Prior to having an animal, but you got to look at the requirements, and then you got to determine what space. Okay, for Burmese Python, like I said, I'd probably go with like an 8x4, and you're probably gonna want to go to Lowe's, man. You go to get a list.
What's the list look like? What's on your list?
I mean, you're talking about if you wanted to go PVC. PVC's not cheap. Actually, it's gotten a little cheaper than I've seen before. Lately, it's cheaper than lumber.
Yeah, I say wood's gold right now.
Yeah, wood's it's ridiculous. But anyways, so you're looking about. I saw it the last time I went. It was like $55 a sheet at Lowe's. And for an 8x4, so 8 foot tall. 8 foot wide. I said that wrong. 8 foot long, 4 foot wide, 4 foot tall. There you go. You're gonna need probably like 4 sheets. 4 sheets, yeah, probably 4 sheets. So minimum, just to get started, you're talking about just doing your sides, top, bottom, and then
a couple $100
on the face, because you would do the face differently. So you can have either sliding glass doors in the front, or like I do, I like to make a lot of stuff
like a latch, like a hatch kind of system. I notice you do.
Yeah. So like I said, I like to make stuff out of other stuff. It's fun for me. So basically, like you can make like my Tegu's cage is actually recycled windows that I cleaned and reused. So you would do your face different, but you gotta understand that you're probably looking at minimum a couple $100, and that's if you just did like lumber. You're probably looking at like $300-400.
I mean, but what does a couple $100 get you the other way? You're looking at an exoterritorium.
Oh yeah, I mean,
what the hell is that? A 4x3?
Not even.
No, not even, dude.
They don't even make them that big. Yeah.
They don't even make it like that. Yeah, for $300, you could buy one of the extra tall, like 36 by 18.
Yeah,
but they're like $350. So for $350, you could basically build a box for your Burmese Python, and then not just that, you got to consider all the other stuff.
Like your lighting, your irrigation.
Lighting, exactly. And then not just that, decorations, things for it to interact with, enrichment. You want to put some branches and stuff like that for
maybe a Rubik's Cube or like a whoopee cushion, whatever they're into these days, so they can have some fun with it. Give them some toys to play with.
Yeah, for sure.
It's important to mention.
I'll give that to mine. See what he thinks about it.
Yeah, and I'll interject. I don't know as much about these big guys as you do, other than the fact that I might have sold some for years at a pet store. I think it's important to mention too that there are other options available for someone who maybe didn't get a Burmese python dumped on their doorstep, and they actually are interested in keeping these big pythons. There are plenty of companies out there that make large enough enclosures that if you have the money, you can spend the money on them, and they have options. You can put radiant heat panels or built-in lighting in there and get them sent to you that way. So those are the other options.
Look at animal plastics is one of them, I believe.
Yeah.
they make some awesome PVC enclosures, and that actually work, I would say, better than plywood, just because of the fact that they will maintain humidity better, they maintain heat better. You don't have to worry about them rotting away if you don't seal them right. So that's actually a really good point. That's something that the average person would go for. The issue is when you're talking about a snake that big, not many companies are going to make what it truly needs,
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
And not many people can have the space to have what it truly needs.
Yeah.
Right.
What are we moving forward? What are we looking for, or what are we looking at when it comes to diet? I mean, these things get truly massive, so
yeah, they do.
The food has got to correspond.
In general,
right?
Burmese pythons, reticulated pythons, anacondas, they're a snake that most people overfeed, so I would, and my recommendation always is to never feed your animal something bigger than its most, like the center diameter of the snake.
Yeah.
So maybe a little bigger than that, but an animal that's fed, in captivity and sitting in a cage doesn't need to be eating, a 40-pound rabbit. Not that you can get a 40-pound rabbit. I mean, you might be
Flemish giants, maybe.
Flemish giants. But doesn't need to be eating a 40-pound rabbit or 30-pound rabbit.
Once a week.
I would give something like that. Maybe like a nothing bigger than a 10-pound rabbit if it's like a big animal. And you're talking about frozen thawed, because you gotta understand that it's hard to get food for these big snakes too. Especially once they get to that point.
Yeah, and when you're feeding something that big, food that big, and I mean, you think this is your pet, you want to enjoy this thing, and you're concerned about its well-being and longevity. You don't want to put a scrappy-ass 10-pound rabbit in there with your snake, and next thing you know, he's got an eye missing and cuts all down his body, bite marks, get chewed up. So, I mean, that's something to think about too.
I mean, it can happen. I guess it could happen. But, in general, it's easier to find frozen thawed food, whether it be like chickens, rabbits, things like that. As a baby or as a young snake, you would start off with basically like your pinkies. Well, not pinkies. Probably like a rat pup. Like most other snakes. So you're going to start with like a rat pup, and then you're going to upgrade, obviously, medium rats, small rats, things like that. And at the end, you're going to get to the point where you're feeding rabbits. Now, it is important to know, like we talked about earlier, that you definitely don't want to overfeed these snakes. So once they get to a certain size, let's say, 10 foot, and they're a couple years old, probably like a year and a half old, something like that, 2 years old. It's actually good to fast your snake, man. So I prefer, and it's recommended that you only feed them probably like once a month, maybe max, maybe a little less. I feed my guy maybe like every, like, it varies, it's good to keep them on like a different schedule, so they kind of don't know when it's really coming. But I feed my guy probably like every 5 weeks, 6 weeks. And he's solid, man. I mean, he's solid. Because you got to think that an animal that's not actively hunting and actively doing everything like they would outside doesn't need to eat all the time. And honestly, we feed them a lot more than they probably would eat in the wild. I mean, when you see a wild Burmese, they're pretty, they're not very fat, man.
Yeah, and that's why they'll take food just about any time you put it in front of them, because they're opportunistic feeders. They don't know when their meal's coming. They don't know when the next one's coming.
So in general,
if they got room for it, they're gonna take it.
Yeah, Yeah, they're going to take anything, So in general, you would want to set it up in something. You could use, like an 8x4. You can use overhead lamps and a combination of maybe some radiant heat tape or heat panels. I would suggest, and something that I've been doing some more research into is lighting. So in my recommendation, I would actually use maybe like halogen heat lamps or halogen heat lamps, or you could use like, what do you call the ceramic heat emitters. I prefer halogen just because they provide more infrared A. That's another topic, but basically infrared A will heat your animals more from the inside, I guess is what you could say. So it's not like the type of heat that you would get from like a heat pad or something like that. A heat pad is just like it's infrared C, so it's like a more just a surface heat. So I would go with like a halogen lights or something like that on a dimmer. That would work great. And then you could have just a LED light for just visible light. And then, something that's pretty, not a lot of people are starting to talk about now. You can also provide UV. So that's it if you wanted to.
Yeah, I don't think
I would suggest you do. I believe that, pretty much any animal that's adapted to living outside, even us, we're adapted. We use the sun too. It's good for us.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because we were just going over a paper the other day, me and you, Nick, about diurnal animals, mainly snakes. They have lens filters in their eyes. Now, if they're diurnal, they have special UV lens filters in their eyes, so they basically don't burn their eyes out. I mean, not literally, but you know what I mean. So it's not overpowering on their eyes. Whereas nocturnal species do not have that UV lens filter. So that's something to think about too. I mean, is your nocturnal snake going to be out and about during the day? Probably not. Maybe. I've seen some. Sometimes
they all
pythons out hanging out. Yeah. So do you want to have him, getting pounded with UV? No, probably not a bad thing. Probably not a bad thing. But if you have a diurnal animal, period, it can 100% benefit, I feel like, from UV.
I mean,
to little to no harm to itself.
Definitely benefit from UV.
Yeah, I would agree with that sentiment. The other thing is to mention that there are a wide range of ultraviolet options available now. It used to just be you could get like a 5.0 and a 10.0. Now we have companies like Vivtech and the longer standing company like Arcadia. They make a wide range of they make shade dwellers. So I mean, if you're concerned about maybe putting down, real quick, we got Andrew from DA Exotics. Thanks for coming back, bud. I appreciate that. I know you were over there watching Wally Supreme 12 Supreme Days of Christmas. Thanks for coming over and giving us a holler too. Appreciate that. What was I going to say? So yeah, I mean, if you were concerned about maybe too high in a UV output for something that's typically nocturnal, but you still want to give them that exposure, then go with the shade dweller. I think that's a really good choice.
It imitates the dappling in basically of a canopy. That would work great. Sorry guys, I know I keep moving like crazy. This Red Bull gave me wings, man.
Hey, so speaking about UV, in my I hate to keep coming back to this, but this is just fresh on my mind. In my research with chameleons over at the Chameleon Academy, he has a really good section on. Now, you really probably don't. This probably won't affect like snakes and stuff like that, but there's actually like a range at which the animal will most benefit as far as distance is concerned away from the UV light source. So, being too close to that UVB light source can actually be harmful to the animal. So you need to think in some cases about maximum reach of the animal inside the enclosure as far as it relates to the UVB source. And
Yeah,
if
and then
you can't manage that well without losing space in your cage, you need to raise the UVB source so you keep them in that effective range and not in the harmful range.
Yeah,
Well,
and
that's
most
something
boxes,
to think about.
most packaging will have like a diagram that says your desired distance that you would want to have, but also you can go and find things like a solar meter, like a
Chris 200 US.
Now,
so I was looking into solar meters. They're pricey, but that's definitely the way to go.
They're pricey, but you got to remember, man, that they basically started it, man. That solar meter, man, that was like the first thing for UV to really measure UV in this industry. So that's
another thing people don't think
there's a lot of companies
when it comes to UV dispersion is your screen. If your light is on top of a screen versus like inside the cage hanging, that screen actually acts as a filter and disperses the light a little more, so that will decrease your effective range, essentially allowing your animal to become closer to the source at
if it wanted to,
less dangerously, if that even makes sense.
You know what? At the end of the day, as long as you put it within a reasonable distance, the animals know, man. They know, and like as long as if you give them a branch, that goes all the way to the top. They probably won't, You just got to give them the choice.
Well, yeah, that's essentially what my point was going to be. My last point on this, just to add to it, is that it goes back to providing your animal with a cage that allows for the options. So if you're giving them a cage that only allows for the option to be within that effective range and or above, into that way more effective range, then that's where the issue comes in. If you give them the option, like for you with chameleons, Charles, you're learning. I just learned this on a Chameleon Academy podcast earlier, that the microclimate can literally just be that shaded area in the bottom of your enclosure, because down there the temperature's lower, the amount of visible light is lower, the amount of ultraviolet light is lower, so you get that microclimate. So it all comes back to that, really.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess my point is that, we were talking about Burmese pythons. It's really hard to give an animal like that a choice-based care. When
because
you
it's
think
so
about how big they get.
So you really have to take that into consideration. So even though Burmese pythons are commonly kept, maybe not as commonly kept as they were 10 years ago, and they are still a popular choice for some keepers, they're sort of the opposite end of the spectrum from a corn snake.
Yeah, man, it's honestly a shame. It's honestly a shame how easily accessible they are.
I think that's gone down a little bit since our days in the pet store.
Burmese pythons for sure, but
I feel like the stuff happening in Florida is a big kind of eye-opening thing to the public.
Yeah, and it comes back to
even people that don't know anything about a reptile know that there's massive snakes running around Florida now.
Yeah, I know.
You know what I mean?
Unfortunately, the media, they don't put it, in the right. How do I say it? Like,
they always sort of just
they
use the buzzwords to grab people with the headlines. Yeah. So it's big snake, dangerous snake.
Exactly,
all that stuff.
But maybe that's not a bad thing, because maybe that's going to deter somebody that doesn't have any business with a 15-foot snake, may not even know that it's a 15-foot snake. Because if you see a juvenile sitting next to a rock and sitting next to a ball, they're not that different in size. They're not that different. You're not going to be like, okay, this ball python is going to max out around 4 feet and this berm's going to max out around 15. You're not going to know that, being somebody who doesn't know anything,
Yeah.
Right.
So maybe that, those hot button words have maybe deterred some of the public from getting them in the long run, harming these animals for virtually no reason.
Like, it's really hard to prevent people from doing anything they're going to want to do nowadays.
Well, that's why we're doing this type of thing, and that's why the people who really care about these animals and have a passion for them are trying to put out the best information possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Unfortunately, there's a plethora of information available in the digital age, so that's why we stress again that if you're going to do research on an animal that you want, if you want a Burmese python, take it seriously, do your research, look at a lot of information,
do your
try to
research
figure out
first, because
a consensus. Yeah.
the fact is that you'll need a bigger enclosure before way faster than you think you will. I guess is my thing.
I say that's the takeaway.
Yeah. And at the end, I said 8x4 in this as a example, but you would technically need something a lot bigger than that.
Yeah, if you want to really do it justice, then yeah, you would definitely need something that they could stretch out in, and that you would have at least some ability to create at least one or two different microclimates for them to have a choice.
I mean, if you want to see a pretty decent example of how big a Burmese python enclosure should be, you can look up Kemp Kennan. It's a guy in Florida, with big reptiles and stuff like that, and he actually has a beautiful female albino Burmese in an enclosure inside one of his buildings. And I mean, it's awesome to see this, like 16-foot snake be able to stretch out 100% and still have space to stretch out more if it physically could,
Yeah, exactly. Andrew's got it right there. Should be. Research is key, 100%.
Research is key. He's right.
I agree too. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, impulse buys happen. People are gonna do what they want, but the thing is, we need to put better information out there right now, because you still see a lot of this older style of care out there, and it's really time to change that up.
Yeah, I agree. I think that sort of goes for just about everything, especially for the pet keeper, and there's definitely things that large scale, and I'm not talking about the home breeder who just wants to do a pair or two for a hobby. I'm talking about large scale people who want to produce a large enough amount to maybe sell at shows or online, or even the people who are providing, the stock for the things that most people are going to see in big pet stores. There's ways that they can bring in some of this stuff that's not going to change it to where they can have 1,000 snakes in a building, but now they can only have 200. But they can sort of just bring in these other elements to increase the well-being of their animals, and maybe even, increase the overall health and longevity of them, so they can continue to do these things for even longer.
I mean, realistically, you got to think, you got, a snake that's going to get, it's going to be,
Yeah, I mean, people who are doing Burmese pythons are probably not all doing them in drawers. I mean, I think we're seeing that sort of go away, which is good. There are definitely species of snakes like corn snakes and like ball pythons that do seem to thrive in the drawer type things, and there are certain things that you can do to increase the enrichment that they get in those drawers while still allowing you to do it economically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's
a
pretty good way to land on it.
Just taking the newspaper out of your tub and putting in some loose bedding.
Yeah.
That right there helps,
Which I think most people who the typical ball python breeder, I think most people are moving away from paper and then moving to a loose substrate, whether it be cocoa blocks or, jungle mix or something like that. Yeah. So there's definitely a move in that direction, and I think it's an overall good thing. We're definitely getting up towards our time, but I don't know if you guys want to let me talk about at least one more. If you have the time.
Come on.
I'm not going to go into all of them, but I would like to talk about leopards if we can.
Yeah, let's talk about leopard geckos.
Yeah.
They're freaking cute as hell.
So we can at least hit a few of the ones that were on the thumbnail, and maybe we could do a whole nother episode. Maybe we can make this like a just a bi-monthly thing or something where we talk about
what I would like to know if in the comment section sorry about that, in the comment section, once the video's been out and we get some good views on it, I would love to hear from anybody. Would you like some more maybe more specific husbandry podcasts? Let's talk about one species.
We want to hear from you.
Yeah, because I would enjoy doing that, definitely. Or maybe even one topic such as lighting, humidity.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have to find
all types of stuff. We got plenty of time. We got infinity more of these to do, hopefully. So whatever you want to hear is what we want to provide you. So pick an animal, pick a topic. We would love to speak about it. That's the big thing here.
Yep, definitely. I agree. So did we land on?
No, Nick. Let's talk about some leopard geckos, man.
Let's talk about some leopard geckos. So we're going to get into another species that I used to keep but don't keep currently. Have no aversion to maybe doing them again in the future, considering I am Gecko Galaxy, and you know, I'm obviously specializing mostly in geckos, but leopard geckos. So Ubiferus macularius. Most people maybe don't know that name, but they know the leopard gecko. It is a extremely commonly kept species in the pet trade. Very popular pet first lizard alongside things like bearded dragons. I would argue they're probably a little bit better, just for economical reasons. But their natural history involves, you know, where they're native to: Southeast Afghanistan, Western India, Pakistan, Iraq, and according to the research I've done, probably north of 90% of the ones you're going to find in the trade today originate from Pakistan collected animals. Andrew from DEA says we need to talk about 1969 Formula Firebird.
Hey, let's do it. Hey, we could probably do it. You want to talk about body work? That's my specialty. Or you want to make the motherfucker run? He could. No, hold up.
Yeah, we got the body man, and we got the the mechanical man, and then we got the guy who just knows how to make geckos make babies.
Yeah,
that's what I do.
Yeah.
But
we could do. Hey, we could do a Chevy's podcast. That's my thing.
Man. We could
do that.
And make them run.
Yeah.
Oh, that's our other loyal viewer. She's back again. She wants to know more about tortoises. So yeah, we can make that happen. We don't all have a ton of tortoise experience. Gabe is currently keeping one species of tortoise. I've never actually kept one myself, but I would love to get into tortoises. So yeah, definitely, we could probably make that happen, even though we don't have a lot of our own experience to draw on. And also Cresties were probably going to be talked about tonight, but maybe not now. We might just have to do a whole crested gecko episode.
Yeah, we can do another.
I feel like that is definitely the one.
Yeah, because we got a decent amount of collective knowledge here for those. But go ahead.
I'd like to do a tortoise one as well.
Yeah, tortoise would be great.
We can do one on tortoises, and we can do one on Cresties and stuff like that, because we probably won't have time today.
Yeah. They were on the list, but you know, this is live, so we try to give ourselves a limit to how far we can go. But continuing on, Asian water monitors. There you go, Gabe.
Oh, Asian water monitors. Oh my god. Yeah. Man, they're just awesome.
We got like 30 podcasts planned out if we just do one on each species that we own collectively. So that's like the next 30 weeks.
Oh.
Yeah, Asian water monitors. That's another one, man. It's a huge lizard. Well, they get to be huge depending whether you got on what locality you have, and things like that, man. And yeah, we definitely will do a podcast about them, because that's, you know, probably my favorite animal that I currently own.
Yeah.
He's a pain in the butt, but
yeah, man. I think she's gonna be laying soon.
Yeah, water dragons too. Very nice.
Yeah, she'll be laying soon.
Me and Gabe's very first pet lizard that we ever had. Just an awesome species that's really underrated, I think, in the hobby, and underkept, and even under captive bred. So we could probably
exactly. You know, it's crazy because it's one of those species that is seen so much in the pet trade, and the sad fact is that 95% of them are wild caught.
Yeah, you know, I mean, there's a small number of people that are working with them, but they're not the ones that are supplying the large chain pet stores, most likely.
Yeah, exactly. So that's
how come we'll never get any Boa love, man?
Doing a project here soon that's close to my heart.
We don't ever get any Boa love out here.
Yeah, there's Boas are maybe underappreciated in this small group of people. Even though I love all reptiles, I just never got into keeping Boas. I know you did. And you'll probably have them again at some point at this point, because I think you're getting sucked in. So it's only a matter of time.
Bro, you screwed up. I think that, like crack. Honestly, I think having a drug habit would probably be cheaper than.
So. I think that that the takeaway from this little excerpt is that we definitely can do a podcast on almost just about anything. So
What about that,
if
Gabe?
anything,
Was this
We're gonna be seeing that.
bad eaters.
Some bad eaters, huh? What about that?
I'm going. What?
Bad eaters. You
Bad
gonna be
eaters,
making
Gabe.
some bad eaters?
I don't know, man. I have the makings of it, but if I were to do it, I think I would probably breed them and then only hatch out maybe 4 or 5 eggs. I would probably feed the rest of the eggs to my tegus and my monitors.
Yeah,
Just because-
From what I understand, you have a gorgeous high contrast male albino Burmese python.
Yeah, I do. He's gorgeous, man.
And you have a gorgeous female retic that is het for albino.
Yep, I sure do.
Okay.
But,
Yeah, okay.
you know,
So
it's
Andrew,
something that, I got, they got a while to go, especially the little female.
There you go, Andrew. Boa love.
That's
he's
actually
got the
one of
bow
my.
love.
I love, reticulated pythons. I've loved them since. That's like my first love in reptiles. And that was something that I had to one day get another one, and I finally had the opportunity to get one. This October in Tinley. So
Yeah.
I'm excited. I'm excited.
Quick little excerpt.
So yes,
on what
that
Andrew
eaters
just
coming
said.
soon, maybe.
Boa love, man. I gotta give him a little rundown of my first experience with boas. How old was I at that Reptile Expo, Nick?
When you
13
picked
years
up,
old?
Yeah.
Yeah,
fun
I had
little
to be
aside,
13 years old.
that exact boa is in a very obscure YouTube video that like 2 12-year-olds put on YouTube. Wow, I can't speak. At that expo, somebody put it on there, and he was like, "This boa is so cheap, Dad. Let me get this boa," and then you bought it.
Yeah, so I was told to not come back with any reptiles, and I was going with my older brother, Nick. And of course, he told him, I'm not going to let him come back with anything. But he doesn't listen very well. So
last words.
I found this retired.
I blocked it.
Good. What the fuck?
Okay.
Anyway.
Well, we're seeing
shit.
our first really weird stuff on the comment section. I am not gonna say what was
Don't
said, but
repeat any
oh
of it.
my goodness.
Yeah,
so
don't repeat any of it. That
users
is
been blocked.
abominable, and you should be
What did he
ashamed of
say?
yourself. Anyway, I'm not telling you while we're live.
Yeah. Okay.
So anyway, back to the story. Sorry about that.
Yeah, a little
There's
distraction.
this
He got us.
retired male breeder Nicaraguan boa, and the price on him was $15, and he was in good health. And I was like, "Fuck it." So here I am, 13 years old, getting into the reptile community, following in my brother's footsteps, and I get a $15 6-foot snake. And that started it all.
Oh yeah, that was rough, man. Oh, I remember that. I remember that. That was crazy. But anyways, weren't we talking about leopard geckos?
We were
15 minutes ago we were.
I'm replying to a comment here. It's a good comment. So, Anyway, talking about leopard geckos, I like I said, just to close out that section, there's a plethora of things we could do podcasts on. So again, I'll reiterate: do comment on this video now, or if you don't see it till later, comment. Let us know what you want to hear. But continuing on with the natural history, like I said, Southeast Afghanistan, Western India, Pakistan, Iraq, Iran. These are places we've all heard of. You can sort of build a picture in your mind of what they look like, but that's not what the whole place looks like. Typically where they're found, they're going to be in areas that have a lot of rocky outcrops, soils that are characterized with either like hard clay, gravel, and sandy soils. So this is sort of a typical area that you might think of as a quote unquote desert, with drought resistant plants and grasses and things like that too. This is the sort of thing you always want to take into account when you're getting a species. You want to find out about its natural history so you can try to replicate that as best you can. Obviously, you're not going to be able to do it exactly like what they have, but you can definitely replicate it. Yeah,
it's something that it's very simple, and most people don't realize they can do. If you go to, let's say, just Google and type type in Burmese Python, you can go to your Wikipedia, and it'll basically it'll have a very simple explanation, about the animal and where it comes from. But a lot of times, I mean, you can get, you can find out a lot of information just from that.
Yeah, for sure.
You don't have to necessarily go, to Google Scholar and do all these crazy searches and everything. But
yeah,
you can do a simple search, just like, go into Wikipedia. If you put, like, let's say Burmese Python, I'm sure it'll tell you that they come from Southeast Asia and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's simple. It's something that's very simple to do. And
yeah, it's simple and it's often overlooked. But segueing into my personal experience with leopard geckos, started pretty much the same way as corn snakes. I kept a couple as pets for a little while. Back in the day when I had my whole entire bedroom in my parents' house full of reptiles. And I kept in anywhere between 10 and 20 gallons aquariums, basically. The standard height, nothing with a lot of extra height or anything like that. And I started out sort of what most people would definitely consider the wrong way, and took recommendations of pet stores and things like that. Yes. Definitely, Andrew, you got to do that. Let's, just like we said earlier, check more than one place. Don't just look at the first care sheet you find.
That's for sure. I was just reading that.
Yeah, research is not a one-stop shop, man.
Yeah, man.
Nope.
Definitely not.
No.
Nope. You gotta increase your sample size. That's the mantra of the Reptile Hangouts podcast. Get that
N up.
Yeah,
get that N up.
But I used calci sand early on the recommendation of pet stores, but that stuff has been pretty proven to be not so good. I mean, any sand has the ability to possibly impact your animal if ingested, but I feel like the calci sand we've seen that more often than not with some animals. So that's something that you probably want to stay away from. But it's something I did early on, and I sort of got out of pretty quickly once I did my research when I was first learning how to do the right research and not just taking the first recommendation that I got. And then early on, getting back to providing your animal with as many options as possible, I would usually just provide a singular hide, which I think was sort of probably what most people were doing at that time. We're talking like really early 2000s. And I didn't really keep any particular kind of lighting on them. I did use overhead lighting to achieve my basking area, which you want to be in that 90 to 95 degree range for the actual like hot spot, and then have it sort of flood over so that you're in the range of either 75 to 80 for the ambient temperature in the rest of the cage. But I didn't use any UVA UVB lighting. And getting back to UVA UVB, when it comes to animals that are known to be nocturnal, like leopard geckos, we don't really think of them as being baskers and being exposed to UVA, UVB, but it's been shown in similar species. I'm not 100% sure, so I can't speak to it with leopard geckos. I'd have to look into the research. That similar species of like sort of the ground-dwelling geckos and even ublipharid geckos, those geckos that have eyelids, unlike the cresties and the things that most people are used to seeing, that they will sometimes just stick a certain part of their body out of their little cave dwelling during the day, and that's enough to absorb some UVA, UVB. So I believe wholeheartedly that there's benefits to giving your animal UV exposure, even if it's nocturnal. And again,
also got to remember, a lot of the nocturnal species of geckos will rest in basically plain sight, so even though they're nocturnal, they're still getting the sun throughout the whole day.
I think the natural behavior of leopard geckos sort of precludes that. They do go up into rock crevices and stuff, but I believe that wild leopard geckos probably do at least expose part of their body to the sun for some portion of the day. So going back to the options with UVA UVB, if you don't want to put a full 10.0 UV UVB bulb on them, there's companies out there that make shade dweller bulbs like Vivtech and Arcadia, so that's definitely something you want to do. And again, I've kept these animals both ways. So early on, I had a couple of pet leopard geckos. After college, I got into my first sort of herpetoculture part of it, where I was producing animals, and I got into leopard geckos, and I kept them in what is a pretty popular way for large leopard gecko breeders. I kept them in racks too. So I kept them in, adults in 32 quart tubs inside of racks, and the heating is achieved in that system using a flex watt heat tape with a thermostat on it, so it doesn't get too hot, ideally, unless there's a malfunction. And I kept them really simplistically. They had paper substrate, they had water bowls, They had maybe one hide, and that was the way I was keeping them to breed. And the main issue I think I see with that in leopard geckos and pretty much everything that's kept in racks is if you don't integrate some sort of lighting, or if you don't have extra bright lighting in your room, that it's hard to really simulate a full light cycle for them, which is important for any reptile, really, because if they're diurnal, they need to know that it's daytime to be active. If they're a nocturnal, they need to know that it's nighttime to go to be active, and vice versa. So
Yeah,
you
we
want
have
to
establish that circadian rhythm.
exactly. You need to establish the circadian rhythm,
exactly.
and that's that's one very important thing that can be achieved in racks if done right, but is maybe not being achieved in racks at large, and it certainly wasn't being achieved in mine. Okay, yeah, that's interesting, Andrew. I just see your comment here. So he's read that leopard geckos will bask for short times, and yes, most geckos will expose part of their body to sunlight. Yep, that's a good point. So thank you for that bit of information. Like you said earlier, I realize you've been doing this for 35 years. That's amazing. You are obviously going to be a wealth of knowledge. I think me and Gabe probably have about 19 or 20 under our belt, but yeah, that's a
But
long
hey,
time to
we're
be
still
gathering
learning, man.
information. So, and we're still learning,
That's
and
the
I'm
fun,
sure
man.
you are too, Andrew. And that's the fun part of it, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when it comes to leopard gecko feeding, I fed, my pet leopard geckos mostly crickets. I wasn't even aware that dubia roaches were a thing in the early 2000s. I didn't even know what they were. So they were pretty much getting crickets all the time, maybe a mealworm from time to time. It's pretty common in
I remember riding out with you to get your first roach colony.
Yeah, that was when I got into bearded dragons. Like I said, early days, I didn't even know what dubia roaches were. I know that full disclosure, I have a roach phobia. I don't like them things. So I do work with them to feed my animals still currently, and I'll do it because I love the animals, but I don't like the roaches, man.
Bro, I wasn't gonna say nothing, I promise.
Yeah. No, full disclosure here. Full disclosure here. But yeah, so early on I was feeding mostly crickets with occasional mealworms, and then you start to get into your breeding, and I was getting into that in the early 2010s, and I was seeing a lot of the bigger breeders were doing primarily mealworm diets. So that's what I kind of did, and they do seem to subsist really well on a primarily mealworm diet. It is important, however, to provide that extra supplement of calcium with vitamin D3 to
Especially
eliminate,
if you're not using UV.
especially if you're not using UVB, because you want to avoid metabolic bone disease. And what that is we won't go into it entirely, but basically the vitamin D3 that they're absorbing from ultraviolet light, just like me and you, if we don't go outside for months on end, like we did during COVID, you can get a drop in your D, from going out in the sun. And yeah, I saw that. And and so in reptiles, metabolic bone disease is really okay. Metabolic bone disease is really common, and what that does is it messes with their ability to absorb calcium into their skeletal system. So animals that aren't exposed to UV at all definitely need that calcium with vitamin D3, although it's pretty much recommended across the board to supplement with that at least a few times a week. So you're dusting your crickets with that. You're dusting them with a little bit of multivitamin powder. Herptovite by Reptile is a really good one. I still use that to this day, and I also use their calcium supplement. So you're dusting their crickets, at least a few times a week, sometimes more often. And then leopard geckos are interesting, and a lot of gecko species is if you provide them with a little dish of calcium, they'll actually lap it up from time to time because they realize that they need that. So they'll literally go to the dish and they'll just lick up a little bit of calcium from time to time. So that's a good thing to do as well. What the consensus across the board with feeding in reptiles, though, especially insect eating reptiles, primarily insectivorous, is to vary the diet as much as you can. It's always a good idea. So nowadays, you want to make sure that you're offering crickets, you're offering appropriately sized roaches if you have access to them, or if you can stand to do it.
Waxworms, mealworms,
a little bit of waxworms. They're more fatty, so they're more of like a treat. Hornworms are kind of the same way if your gecko is appropriately sized.
Yeah, they got black soldier fly larva.
Yeah, black soldier fly larva. Really there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of different options available, and that's sort of the consensus. So vary the diet. That's what you definitely want to do. Interestingly enough, there's sort of a bit of a difference that we see in like the overall available standards of care here in the US and in the UK. The UK is like really pushing to make strides towards welfare-based care and really large enclosures and things like that. So in my little bit of research, even though I have a decent amount of base knowledge, I found that there's a UK organization that the Pet Center with a E at the end of it. That's how they spell it. It recommends about a 3x2x2 for a leopard gecko, and that's feet. So that's a lot of space. And I think that's a really good idea, especially for the pet keeper, because getting back to being able to achieve those different microclimates, that's a really good idea. But you can keep an adult leopard gecko in a 20-gallon long tank and still give it what it needs to thrive mainly by creating different hides. Since these geckos are going to be hiding for the majority of the daylight hours, I said I used to only provide one hide back in the day. I didn't know any better. Now it's a recommended minimum of 3 hides. You want a cool hide, you want a warm hide, typically where the hottest thing is going to be, and then a moist hide. And that moist hide is going to have some material in it, whether it be like wet paper or sphagnum moss that's moistened, and that's where they're going to
Be
go.
kind of similar to
like
a lay box almost, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
It's
yeah.
prime for, and they would lay there if you decided to breed them. They probably would choose that if that's all you gave them. But yeah, so that's an area that they're going to go when they're getting ready to shed their skin, and it's going to make it a lot easier for them to do that. Or if they just need some extra moisture, obviously clean water bowl should always be provided. And the more enrichment you give them, the better. If you want to build a nice background with rocky outcrops, go right ahead. If you want to give them just some grapevine branches to climb on, if I was a betting man, I would say that if you put those in there, they're going to climb on them. If you come out in the middle of the night and when your gecko's active, I bet they're going to climb on it. So the more enrichment, the better. And then substrates, most of the things that I read nowadays recommend some sort of a solid substrate that there's no chance of ingestion. So you can certainly do a reptile carpet. You can certainly do tiles. Those are really nice and easy to clean. I did those for bearded dragons for a while.
I've seen a few where people have actually made the bottoms the same as the backgrounds.
Yeah, you can do that. And there's a crested gecko.
The bottom, so
where did you get that crested gecko? Where'd you get that guy? That's a good looking little pinstripe there. Where'd you get that?
Yeah, gorgeous girl here from Gecko Galaxy.
Oh, I've heard of that place. Interesting.
Yeah. Or Galaxy Gecko if you sometimes have a word association problem.
But anyway,
if you saw the intro, it's Galaxy Gecko.
Yeah, no, it's Gecko Galaxy. But anyway, very nice, very nice. But anyway, to wrap up the leopard gecko thing is the substrates. That was the last thing I was talking about. So solid substrates are great. They're good for cleaning. There's no chance of ingestion. But a lot of the really big cat keepers now, the pet keepers and the pet tubers, so to speak. There's one on YouTube that I've watched videos years ago on. She's just called Leopard Gecko. She's in the UK. She does a really good job on her enclosures. And she uses a soil mixture, just like a loose soil substrate, almost like a bioactive. I don't know if she does any of them bioactive, but it's a similar type of soil to that. And you got to think, I mean, these animals, as long as they're not ingesting and swallowing large pieces of bedding by accident, there's very little chance for impaction. So I would venture to say that if you wanted to do it really natural and you wanted to mix a little bit of like play sand in there too, to sort of just loosen up that substrate, play sand's a pretty good option. We've sort of found over the years that if a little bit gets in the system, it's something that goes right through. But definitely I would say as a whole, stay away from the calci sand. So that's mostly what I have for leopard geckos, guys. And this is just sort of, most people watching right now probably know this, but if you watch later and you didn't know, now you do. So I hope you appreciate it.
There you go.
All right. Well, quick episode summary. We went over some basic care tactics for corn snakes, leopard geckos, and Burmese pythons. If you would like to hear us expand on any of these 3 things, or possibly expand on something you've recently acquired or are thinking of acquiring, please be sure to let us know in the comments. We would love to tell you everything that we possibly know about them. And
if we have time to prepare, we can figure out new things too.
Yeah. Let us be your resource outlet. If you can't find the information you feel like you're missing, we can get it done. We'll scour the scour the earth for research papers and whatever you need to know to provide you the best information on any animal or any topic you want to hear about. So please let us know. And if you liked tonight's episode or you liked any of the previous ones, please feel free to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We love our live viewers. All of you guys are amazing. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
We look forward to seeing more of you in the future. And here it is, another Friday night. We're hanging out. You're hanging out. This is Reptile Hangouts, guys. Why don't you have a very great weekend and hope you enjoyed your holiday.
Yes, thank you. Happy late Thanksgiving to everybody. And again, thanks to all our live viewers and everybody else who watches and subscribes. We greatly appreciate it. And,
yeah, we'll see you next week.
Yes, we'll see you same time, same place next week. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.